OPB Podcasts.
From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Thursday, July 30th. All 435 seats in the U.S. House are up for election this year, but only 18 of those districts are considered a toss-up. One of those is, once again, the 3rd Congressional District representing Southwest Washington. The race pits incumbent Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez against Trump-endorsed State Senator John Braun. Gluesenkamp Perez has fended off challengers before, but this time we will discuss what could be different, and we'll get into local politics to watch in Clark County. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
I'm OPB Southwest Washington Bureau Chief Erik Neumann.
And I'm OPB Southwest Washington reporter Elena Neale-Sacks.
Erik, let's start with you and start by digging into the 3rd Congressional District. It's really, like I said, expected to be one of the more competitive races in the nation this fall. And even though there are 9 candidates running in the August 4th primary, most people expect this race to really come down to 2 people: Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, the Democrat, and State Senator John Braun, who represents rural parts of the state in Olympia and has some name recognition already. Let's first start by digging into the incumbent. Gluesenkamp Perez has served 2 terms. She's managed to anger both Republicans and Democrats at certain times. Just remind us a bit about her background and who she is.
So Representative Gluesenkamp Perez is a moderate Democrat representing Southwest Washington. She kind of gained notoriety as being a co-owner of an auto repair shop in Portland with her husband. She's a big proponent of the skilled trades. As a member of Congress, she sort of helped revive the Blue Dog Coalition, which is one kind of category of the Democratic coalition. Let's see. As you said, she does a good job of angering everybody at some point or another. Progressives say that she's too conservative. National Republican groups say that she's too liberal. I guess my best description of her, including things that she said about herself, is that she really tries to follow the local needs of her district, even if that means voting against things that her own party disagrees with, or not getting caught up in sort of partisan topics. She calls it a place-based politics. Here's her description in her own words about how she sees her role in Congress when representing this very purple district.
My job is to represent my district, and ideally, when you get a big group of representatives together, what ought to shine through is better federal policy, where you're taking into account these kinds of nuances, where it's like, corporations are not the problem here. It's the power that has accrued to a very few number of corporations, or the lack of access and influence normal people have on legislation.
So she really sees her role as finding the nuance in legislation, even if it means that Democrats might oppose it, but it in some way could be beneficial for her constituents.
Her background is really interesting too, right? She went to Reed, which skews sort of liberal, progressive, and academic. And yet she doesn't really identify, it seems like, with that element of her background, right? It seems to identify more with this rural part of her upbringing.
It is kind of confusing sometimes. She likes to use words like heterodox, and Pyrrhic victory was one that I saw this past week related to, I think, the defense budget bill. But she also is a huge advocate for, like I said, the skilled trades, and always talks about, promoting shop class and things like that. So yeah, really kind of a mix of different influences.
And she was really involved. We were on this podcast talking about it recently in the response to the Longview chemical plant spill. She became a very vocal person in that fight to ensure those workers at the paper mill were paid while the mill was closed. She was meeting with the families of the victims. How do you see her involvement in the Longview-Kelso community at that time playing out in this election cycle, if at all?
It was notable to me, mostly probably because that particular incident happened so recently, just as we really were kind of like gearing up for the primary election. She was really responsive to that incident when it happened in the district. Like you said, she was meeting with families of victims in the incident. She helped get the budget restored for this kind of obscure agency that investigates national incidents like that around the country. She helped pressure the paper mill into making sure that they paid their employees while the mill was shut down. I've talked to some campaign strategists who have said, there's a payoff at the ballot for being responsive to constituents in a moment like this. It really did not come across as performative, and it really was sort of this, sort of like related to her brand as a politician. This area, the Kelso-Longview community, is the second largest population center in her district. And just, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but a few days ago I noticed that she was endorsed by the Washington State Labor Council, the AFL-CIO, which is Washington's largest labor council.
Okay, well, so it could play a pretty good role. What are some of her signature accomplishments? What is she really pointing to as a reason for voters to reelect her?
She talks often about bringing money back to the 3rd District, whether that's on individual projects around the district or, a huge thing like the interstate bridge replacement. She is a big proponent of small businesses. She really does get out into the community, both at the urban center of like Vancouver and more rural parts of the district. I've definitely talked to people throughout the district who say has a significant presence, more so than other politicians in the past. And then I think the other big selling point is Democrats are trying to retake the House, and whether people will consider her a true Democrat or not, like she would play a role in that.
Well, I think you're hinting to this. The answer to my next question is, what do you see as being her biggest vulnerabilities?
So she's just constantly trying to walk this line of how do you cross party lines without alienating too many of your voters. She has lost a lot of support in recent years from progressive Democrats. She has voted for things like the SAVE Act. She's consistently supported Israel. Earlier this month, she was one of just a few Democrats who supported the Republicans' $1 trillion defense policy bill. So progressive Democrats really see these things as discrediting her as a Democrat. And she does have a progressive challenger in the primary election with Brent Henrich. He is definitely pulling away progressive support from her as we approach the August 4th primary.
Last time she ran, she was up against Joe Kent, who certainly seems to be more on the fringe than her current challenger. Kent was associated with the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer, where this time around she's running up against, most likely, state senator that, like I said, has quite a bit of name recognition, John Braun. Remind us a bit about his background.
So, John Braun is the Senate Republican leader for in the Washington State Legislature. He's a state senator in Centralia, which is sort of the northern edge of the 3rd District. He is also the president of a large company called Braun Northwest. It's a family business, and their main thing is building ambulances. And
he is a conservative Republican. I mean, he's well known in Olympia. He's considered more mainstream than Joe Kent, but he did get a Trump endorsement. Just tell us about his politics.
I would describe John Braun as sort of a classic fiscal conservative. Most of his policies in the state legislature relate to tax reform. I asked him what his legislative goals would be if he were to get elected, and this is his response.
At the federal level, I think the two big things you can do to help with affordability is federal income taxes, and I think keeping them at a low rate and keeping the deduction where we did with H.R. 1 last year is a big deal for folks just trying to make their budgets balance. And the other big area the federal government has an impact on affordability is energy pricing, and I think you can make a really good argument that the kind of all of the above strategy, not ruling out renewables by any chance, but saying, hey, we're interested in all above strategy on energy has made a big difference in energy prices in the last year and a half.
So very focused on budgets and taxes, a big difference from Joe Kent, who was really focused on sort of the culture war topics of the day and was really kind of aligned with MAGA Republicans. So Braun said he's largely in support of Trump's policies in Iran, as well with the reductions in Medicaid spending under the Big Beautiful Bill. The one thing that he said he disagreed on was Trump's use of tariffs for economic policy.
We know turnout is going to be a big factor in who manages to win this race. What else are you keeping your eye on? What else do you think will come into play?
It definitely will be interesting to see how much support Gluesenkamp Perez loses during the primary election based on having Brent Henrich as the main third-party challenger. I think that will just be indicative of where her support has gone over the past couple years. Some of the town halls that she's done in places like Vancouver have been quite dramatic. And then after the primary, if she does prevail, how will she regroup those constituents before November? And is there a chance that they will, sit out the general election as a protest?
Thank you so much for that rundown. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get a rundown of some of the more interesting local races in Clark County. And we're back. Let's turn to OPB's relatively new Southwest Washington reporter, Elena Neale-Sacks. Welcome.
Thank you.
You've only been here 1 month. I think that's a record for appearing on the podcast. And you're keeping an eye on some of the Clark County council races. Can you give us an overview of the landscape? How many councilors are up for re-election? What are some of the top issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So this election cycle, 3 out of the 5 seats on the county council are up for re-election or up for election, and they're all contested. So there are a few key issues that have kind of framed these races. One of them is just the county's support for kind of the light rail component of the I-5 bridge replacement project. Obviously, that is a chronic topic of discussion. And then the second one is kind of, just balancing funding county services versus some unpopular tax increases, given that Clark County has been facing kind of a persistent budget shortfall. And then the third kind of issue that I've been looking at is just deciding basically how best to accommodate rapid population growth in Clark County. And, candidates have different views on these issues.
Yeah, so that's helpful to understand what some of the big issues are. A long time ago, I covered Southwest Washington politics, and I remember the Clark County Council getting quite heated at times. What is standing out to you about this election cycle, these council candidates and their dynamics now?
Yeah. So I do, just not to linger on the bridge issue for too long, but it is something that keeps coming up. So that is still a little bit contentious. And as you probably know, Clark County doesn't itself have a huge role in decision making really at all. So most of the disagreements now are kind of about how to use the small amount of power the council actually does have. And so two of the more conservative candidates running, incumbent Michelle Belcott in District 2, and then challenger Brian Scholl for District 1, they are basically against the county funding any of the operating costs for light rail as part of the project. They want it to be really pared down to its bare necessities and reduce the kind of ballooning price tag of the project. And most of the other candidates agree that the costs have gotten a little out of control and they'd like to see more transparency. But they also say, the bridge is going to get built. So it might as well serve people as effectively as possible. And they say that means accepting light rail is happening, and it makes the most sense to extend it into downtown Vancouver so it can connect to other transit options on both sides of the Columbia. And so, really the tension with this issue and kind of the tax and service issue, it boils down to how willing candidates are to support some amount of tax increases in order to kind of make the county a nice and ideally more affordable place to live.
And the light rail is still just one of the most contentious topics about the bridge, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure.
When I worked at the Columbian, the transportation reporter there had a vintage newspaper article from like the 1800s, and it was about fighting over the bridge.
Oh my gosh.
So I think it's safe to say this issue will be here forever. But you also mentioned there's some division about a slightly newer one, which is how the county should navigate population growth, which they are seeing quite a bit of lately. How are those conversations shaping up?
Yeah, well, so just to kind of contextualize that growth a bit. So in Vancouver alone, the population is supposed to grow by about 40% over the next couple decades. So definitely significant. And actually, as Erik has previously reported, the city is not currently on track for the amount of housing that it will need to accommodate that growth. And earlier this year, the county council voted 3-2, so it was a tight decision, to approve a new land use map. And that map basically will allow some cities like Ridgefield, La Center, Camas to expand their urban growth boundaries. And two of the councilors up for re-election, Glenn Young in District 1 and Michelle Belcott, who I previously mentioned, were in the majority of that vote. But some of their challengers in this primary say that those expanded boundaries could encroach on some of the farmland in the county and kind of just lead to more sprawl. And so those candidates argue that, the priority should be building affordable housing in places that are already connected to existing infrastructure and transit, kind of more infill building, and also to just kind of get more creative with a bunch of different types of units like ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, as well as, larger apartment complexes and that sort of thing. But pretty much all the candidates agree that the permitting process could be streamlined. That's kind of one consensus point, it seems.
Okay. Are there any other issues that you're keeping your eye on or you think people should be aware of?
I think mainly I'm curious to see kind of how the incumbents in these two races, Glenn Young and Michelle Belcott, end up doing after these primaries and kind of how much support, whether they advance to the general and, if so, how much support they receive.
Great. Well, the Washington primary is coming up very soon on August 4th, so we will have some clarity around some of these issues soon. Erik and Elena, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was recorded in the Gert Boyle studio. It was produced by Michelle Wiley, and our audio engineer is Stephen Cray. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.